Tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, my name is Mitra Homolia, and I'm presenting this work on behalf of my colleagues Marc Aurel Schnabel and Syed Amir Hussain Magul. We are based at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This paper was initiated as part of a research project that aims to study the impact interior design has on users' emotions in order to identify gaps in the existing empirical research at the intersection of neuroscience, environmental psychology, and architecture. We believe that a systematic literature review would allow us to identify the groundbreaking work that already exists in the field and to locate ourselves within the existing body of research. Our paper, in its essence, is a systematic literature review of contemporary studies at the intersection of architecture, psychology, and neuroscience. Our focus was primarily on studies which have investigated human emotional and mental reactions to built environments by using mobile body-brain sensors. Furthermore, our discussion around contemporary empirical research aims to present a compelling argument in favour of the need for more research in the field. In this presentation, I will be describing our process for our systematic literature review and the 6 main studies which form the base of this study in detail. Finally, our paper attempts to identify gaps in the field and to establish a trajectory for our own research. Neuroscience has developed a body of research which attempts to address the nature of our primal responses to our surroundings. Theories such as the James Lange theory, the Cannon-Bard theory, Scatcher-Singer theory, and facial feedback theory all emphasize the fact that internal stimuli do trigger emotional responses that are closely related to physiological responses. So there are potentials for studying this, especially emotion in the context of architecture, by analysing physiological responses. And there are studies which have already attempted to do this in various different forms. Due to the nature of the recently emerging research in the field, the literature review, search terms inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria required an iterative systematic approach to refine the search terms and identify the relevant material. We use 2 electronic databases, ProQuest and Scopus. We believe them to be dependable directories for empirical research, and also provide advanced search options which enable you to define exclusion and inclusion criteria, so narrowing the scope of the search. A number of studies were also identified manually, and this was done through looking at existing research and looking at their own citations. Searches were conducted and established with a set of keywords and refined through iterations once again. After this, the results were screened based on titles and abstracts, and any information which was deemed to be irrelevant was excluded. So some of the notable criteria which we implemented in our search are as follows. Studies were included that showed that they were recording objective and subjective methods for recording human physiological responses and experiences. We also limited our studies, to the studies that showed empirical data. The search was also aimed towards variables related to the built environment and excluding social, cultural, or behavioural studies or clinical studies. We made sure that these studies included some form of virtual environment as the testing base, whether that's virtual reality, CAVE, AR, or XR, to provide a controlled study environment, but physical environments and other multisensory environments were not outside of the scope of this literature review. We also identified studies which used monitoring equipment such as ECG, EEG, fMRI, and GSR as the recording of objective data. Additionally, we chose studies which include subjective data, such as surveys, self-assessment mannequins, and questionnaires. Additionally, due to the novelty of the field and in conjunction with technology's rapid refinement, The scope of the studies which we looked at was between January 1st, 2010 and January 1st, 2020. Studies were also limited to publications which were peer-reviewed and studies which were conducted in English. And we acknowledge that this dismisses some excellent work from outside the English-speaking world. Individual bias was mitigated by involving 2 people in the refinement stage of the method and the literature review, and then another 2 researchers for further refining with our key terms and exclusion criteria. So from our full text screening, 6 studies were established to have participants navigating virtual environments while naturally walking, which was one of the focuses of our research. These 6 studies form the basis of the discussion for this literature review. And since these exploratory studies have many similarities in their methodologies, but different aims and objectives, a summary of the overlapping parameters was conducted, and I will talk through these. So in regards to the physical and virtual controlled test environments, all of the studies which utilize virtual reality as the control test environment only focus on the impact of visual stimuli. Among these ones that are conducted, 2 studies using physical setting consider the non-visual or multisensory experiences, factoring in things such as temperature. Designing experiments that navigate the change in multisensory experiences is a very challenging task. Moreover, acquiring a suitable statistical method for understanding the actual impact of simultaneous changes necessary. And as of yet, there is very little consistency between the studies, as seen in the studies here. In addition, there's a general lack of evidence of realism within the virtual environments. The lack of immersion could create an element of disbelief in participants, which could alter the data, altering the physiological responses and therefore the emotions. On the note of inconsistency, there tends to be a discrepancy between the data sets and correlations that are being made between studies. Many of the results are left as speculations and are not well-rounded conclusions, which is understandable due to the novelty of the field. And while all 6 studies have some form of objective data measurement, 2 studies do not report on any subjective self-reflection. Of the 6 selected studies, 3 use ANOVA as the mode of data analysis. RepTree is also used, Pearson's correlation analysis, and even one study which uses qualitative data analysis in the form of diagrams. From this, it is quite evident that there is no standard way of analysing the data or predicting the correlations between the data sets. And although this is appropriate for empirical case studies, a more rigorous, standardised scientific protocol or method needs to be established for evaluating physiological responses in virtual environments. In experiments which use monitoring equipment such as EEG, ECG, fMRI, or GSR, movement usually causes noisy data, so is often avoided. Instead, most studies measure participants which are in static positions. This can be a limitation, as a lot of the meaning-making process of a built environment from the perspective of the participant is made through movement. It's part of making sense of any given haptic built environment. And lastly, the selected studies had a range between 4 and 30 participants. This in itself is a limitation, as it's most likely due to the difficulty of acquiring involving participants and the cost of involving participants. The small number of participants is a limitation to gaining a broader understanding, to gain an understanding of whether there's universality between the interpretation of built environments and discovering whether there are basic physiological responses to built environments. So as previously discussed, the main issue arising from these studies is a lack of consistency and a lack of standard methodology between the studies, particularly in the context of architecture. Many of the limitations of current methodologies are due to the novel nature of the field, and although a growing body of research has been published, the research in the field is still at its primary stages. The lack of consistency across the studies must be monitored in order to be able to take or make conclusive references in regard to how the built environment evokes physiological responses, thus evoking emotions. We believe that there is a potential for studying the way that built environments evoke emotions, such as a sense of awe, in beholders, using neurophysiological data that can provide objective data in a non-intrusive way. As an emotion which has been evoked within architecture for millennia, understanding awe could be the next step in understanding how architecture can elicit these emotions, especially immense physiological and emotional responses. Central to this question is what characteristics of space can produce emotional arousal, and conversely, is there a way that architects can remove stress from a built environment by utilizing virtual environments when designing the scenarios for inhabitants to experience? Since the completion of this paper, we have been delving further into work regarding the use of cybernetic self-regulating systems within virtual reality environments to elicit and moderate emotional states via dynamic interior design features. We hope to be reporting on this work very near in the future. I sincerely appreciate your attention. Thank you. Nō reira tēnā koutou katoa.